Chapter 15. Moto pulled off her protective goggles and turned to Ripley. "If that doesn't hold it shut, nothing will," she said. Moto had just finished welding braces around one of the hull's 2 exit hatches. McQuaid was still working on the other one. Ripley stood with her arms crossed and waited for the alloy's glow to die down. The air stank of burned metal and plastic. They were going in a few minutes, and the tension in the crew showed in their tight expressions, but Ripley felt surprisingly calm. McQuaid snapped off his welder. "Done," he said, a little too loudly. Ripley nodded at him. She had thought she would be a lot jumpier by now. Her relaxed state was almost disconcerting. But it wasn't a lack of concern, it was more like fulfillment, she thought. Being where I'm supposed to be. After she checked the hatches, Ripley followed the other 2 back to the upper deck. The hatches looked solid enough, and were certainly the best they could do. But this wasn't some drone. She would have to hope that the Queen bitch wasn't going to be too much for them to handle. She had dealt with ordinary queens, and they were bigger, stronger, and meaner than drones. She hoped the Queen of Queens wasn't that much worse. No matter. It was what they had. Now the crew strapped into their seats. Billie offered her a quick and nervous smile as Ripley walked to the front and around the control area's partition. Brewster sat in Pilot 1, Tully behind him. Wilks adjusted a strap on one of the secondary chairs. Ripley moved up to Pilot 2 and sat. Wilks looked at her. "Hey Ripley, we ran a matrix on the movement in the southern hemisphere, in case we have to land there." "No in case," she said. "She's there. You know it." Wilks shook his head and grinned. "Okay, probably. We'll know soon enough. Anyway, Tully picked up rock formations like you wouldn't believe. It's going to be tricky. There's a little wind, too." Brewster turned from the console and nodded at Wilks. "If it was easy, anybody could do it. Besides, topography's the APC's problem. All I gotta do is drop you off." Ripley let the bitterness slip past. Brewster was obviously still pissed that he wasn't going to attend their scouting party. "Yeah, but flying it's going to be a bitch. Glad you're at the helm, Brewster. Hotshot like you shouldn't have too many problems." Brewster didn't reply, but Ripley saw him relax a little. Good. They were going into harm's way, and the last thing she needed was a smarmy pilot. Tully spoke up. "Carvey and I sectored the APC's comlink," she said, "so you don't have to worry about scattering." "Great," said Ripley. She looked at the readout in front of her and felt her hands start to clench. The lack of tension she'd felt wasn't going to last now that there was nothing left to do but sit and wait. "I guess we're ready," she said. "Good thing," said Brewster, "'cause here we go, bearing 06. The rest of his words seemed to fade as he punched a button, and they fell out of space. Billie gripped the armrests of her chair, eyes tightly closed. Her stomach was knotted in the usual lurch of freefall. This was a feeling she didn't think she'd ever get used to. She imagined the Kurtz shooting through the heavy clouds, pummeled by the rains, and... Scratch that, she thought, as she felt nausea rise up. She searched for a more pleasant thought. Last night, with Dylan, the closeness, the touching, the rolling and pumping over and over, falling forever. Ugh, oh Lord, scratch that too. The ship suddenly seemed to catch up to her twisted belly. Not an easy drop, but the worst had to be over. She opened her eyes. She hoped the worst was over. Char smiled at her shakily. Not dead yet, she said. Billie nodded and looked over at the nearest port. Nothing to see. They were still too high. Wilks leaned his head around the partition, expression tense. Local winds look to be pushing 130 knots, he said. And that's down below the jet stream. Better button up before it gets rough. At the sound of his voice, Billie felt her guts tighten. So much for the worst being over. She fought down a rising sense of dread. She felt that her entire life had been spent in preparation for this moment. She believed in this, was ready to risk her neck for it. For Amy. For Ripley and Wilks and the others. They all had their own reasons. Duty. Honor. She looked over at Falk, at his blank face. He had vengeance. It wasn't the thought of death that frightened her. It was the uncertainty. The flight smoothed out, became almost calm. Carvey and Falk unbuckled and moved to one of the ports. What the hell, Billie thought, and stood to join them. They broke out of the cloud cover into the most desolate place Billie had ever seen. The Kurtz moved too fast to get a good look, but as far as she could tell, it was all the same. Pools of shallow grey water stretched for clicks, broken up and surrounded by dirty humps of rock. Clumps of colourless vegetation, much of it apparently fungal, towered at the edges of the water. Some strange variety of beige moss seemed to cover everything. They passed a copse of the bizarre plant life, which struck Billie as the work of an insane sculptor. Twisted limbs and vines branched off into the air and pulsed slightly in the winds that shook the ship. Off in the distance, Billie saw impossibly tall stands of rock, scattered randomly in the endless dark sea. Nice place. She turned away. We'd better head down to the APC, she said. Right, said Carvey. He started towards the stairs, followed by Falk and Dunstan. Jones walked back towards medical. Billie stood still for a moment, tried to prepare herself. You okay? Char asked. Billie looked at her friend, saw the concern on the lieutenant's face. Yeah, just getting my nerve up. As Billie walked behind Char to the lower level, she couldn't stop the fear from welling up. That they were all just some part of a huge plan, that their sense of purpose was fake. That maybe they hadn't really come of their own accord, but had been lured by the dreams. Buddha, what a great place, said Brewster. Maybe I'll take my vacation here. He navigated the Kurtz through the strange environment. Crosswinds buffeted the vessel hard enough to rock it. Wilks stared. Yeah, this was without doubt the most god-awful planet he'd ever seen. He could almost feel the thick wetness of the air around the ship, smell the dead chemical odour of the alkaline water. Just looking at this nightmare gave him the creeps. Brewster interrupted his thoughts. I've got a spot scoped where it seems relatively calm, not far from the main cluster of movement. No one spoke for a minute. Take it or leave it, folks. I can't dick around for long in this damn wind, said Brewster. Take it, said Ripley, and stood up. Come on, Wilks. Let's go back with the grunts. Tully smiled at them as they headed down the stairs. Luck, she said. Brewster struggled with the controls, but managed a thumbs up. The others were crowded around the APC in the dock. Wilks motioned for the rest of the crew to get on, and boarded last. He watched everyone strap in before he moved to the front. Billie sat at the console. She would monitor outside activity as they got closer to the motion that Brewster had picked up. A voice crackled out over the intercom. "Hey kids, almost there," said Brewster. "Tully says the movement has stopped, but it seemed to be coming from a formation almost due west from where we're dropping you. That's a 272 heading, to be exact." "Rock formation?" said Billie. "Negative. Looks organic. Listen, Carvey, you still owe me money, so be careful, okay? Goes for the rest of you too." "Got it," said Billie. "Thanks, Brewster," Wilks said. "On your go." Wilks keyed the controls for the machine and checked the navigational. Everything looked fine. The mobile unit was built like a chunk of lead on wheels, designed to move over any terrain, if not comfortably, at least efficiently. The front view screen gave a good shot of the outside, currently the inside of the dock. There was also a small clear steel shield that offered a more limited view. There were recoilless guns mounted on the pivotal on top, as well as in the front. This was supposed to be a check. With any luck, he wouldn't have to use them. "Stand by," said Brewster in a burst of static. Wilks tensed, ready. The Kurtz touched down. Wilks rolled his head with the sudden impact, felt the planet's surface grind and crunch beneath the ship. The APC slid forward as the deck dropped out on metal struts, the hatch opening outward. "Go!" Wilks grabbed the control stick and eased the APC off the extended ramp and into the water. There were scattered rocks and weird vegetable growths here and there, but essentially they were looking at an ocean less than a meter deep. Here, anyway. It surrounded them in every direction, as far as he could see. Wind rippled the surface into a shifting washboard, occasional gusts blowing spray from the tiny whitecaps. The APC's rear wheels pulled off the deck, and they settled into the liquid with scarcely a bump. "Good job," said Wilks. "We're down, and welcome to town, folks." "And we are out of here," said Brewster. The sounds of the ship as it lifted were loud, even inside the APC. Brewster and the others would head back up, above the winds, and wait for the pickup call. If there's anybody left to send it, thought Wilks. There was something wrong. He felt it in his gut. But they were there, and it was time. "Let's go and see if the Queen's home," he said. The APC rumbled forward,